The moment my mother laughed and told a stranger I was embarrassing, something inside me went completely still. It was not anger, not even humiliation at that point, just a quiet kind of clarity that I had never felt before. I remember sitting there, looking around the table, realizing that this was not a one-time joke or a misunderstanding. This was a role they had written for me years ago, and they had never once questioned it. That night, though, something shifted, and for the first time, I decided I was not going to correct them, argue with them, or defend myself. I was just going to let the truth sit there and see what happened. We were at one of those upscale restaurants my mother always insisted on, the kind with soft golden lighting and polished tables that made everything feel more refined than it really was. My sister Emily had picked the place, of course, and she looked completely at home there, laughing easily, leaning forward as she spoke to her new boyfriend like she was presenting the best version of her life. She had always been like that, confident, composed, able to turn even the smallest detail into something impressive. I walked in a few minutes late, slid into my seat, and as expected, no one really acknowledged it. That was normal for me. Emily noticed me eventually and smiled, but it was not the kind of smile that welcomed you. It was the kind people give when they remember something mildly amusing. She turned to her boyfriend, Daniel, and said casually that he had not met me yet. He looked at me with polite curiosity, the kind you have when you do not yet understand the dynamics of the room. We shook hands, exchanged names, and that was it. The conversation moved on quickly, circling around promotions, real estate, travel plans, all the usual topics that made everyone at the table feel accomplished and secure. I stayed quiet, listening more than speaking, which had become my habit over the years. It was easier that way. Every time I had tried to insert myself into these conversations before, it had either been ignored or turned into something else. So I learned to sit back and let it pass. Still, I noticed Daniel glancing at me every now and then, not with judgment, but with a kind of curiosity that felt different from what I was used to. It was as if he could sense something was off but could not quite figure out what. Halfway through the appetizers, the conversation dipped just enough for the inevitable question to come up. It always happened eventually, like a script everyone followed without thinking. Daniel asked me what I did for work, his tone casual and friendly. I barely had time to take a breath before my mother jumped in, laughing as she waved her hand dismissively and told him not to ask because I would embarrass everyone. The table erupted in laughter, the same laughter I had heard countless times before, practiced and automatic. Emily leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the moment, and added that maybe I should lie this time so I would not sound pathetic. More laughter followed, louder this time, and I felt every bit of it land exactly where it was meant to. For a long time, I used to push back against moments like that. I would try to explain my job, clarify what I actually did, prove that I was not what they made me out to be. It never worked. If anything, it made them double down, like correcting them only made their version of me more real in their minds. So this time, I did something different. I just smiled, calm and quiet, and when the laughter faded, I answered Daniel directly. I told him I worked in regulatory compliance, focusing on infrastructure contracts. I kept my voice steady and simple, not trying to impress, not trying to defend, just stating a fact. It was not a sentence that meant much unless you understood the field, and my mother immediately tried to steer the conversation away, jumping back to Daniel and asking him about his company instead. But Daniel did not let it go. He looked at me more closely now, tilting his head slightly as if something had clicked. He asked who I worked for, and for the first time that evening, the table grew a little quieter. I took a sip of water before answering, letting the pause stretch just enough to be noticeable. Then I told him I worked for the State Transport Authority. Emily froze for a brief second, her fork hovering in midair, and Daniel's expression shifted as recognition set in. He explained that his firm worked with several projects tied to that authority, and that contract approvals went through that office. The energy at the table changed, not dramatically, but enough that you could feel it. He leaned forward slightly and asked if I was part of the review board. I nodded and told him I was a senior compliance officer. That was when the silence really settled in, not heavy or dramatic, but sharp enough to cut through the usual rhythm of the conversation. My mother laughed again, but it sounded forced this time, thinner, like she was trying to maintain control of something that was slipping away. Daniel did not laugh. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about the role, about contractor eligibility and project approvals. I answered calmly, keeping everything neutral, offering just enough detail to be clear without turning it into a performance. I could see the realization forming in his mind, and more importantly, I could feel my family hearing it too. Emily stopped making comments entirely, her attention suddenly fixed on her plate. My mother did not interrupt again, which in itself was unusual. The jokes disappeared, not replaced by praise or admiration, but simply gone, as if they no longer fit the moment. Daniel mentioned that compliance reviews from my department could delay projects for months, and I acknowledged it without elaborating. The conversation continued, but it had shifted into something quieter, more careful. For the rest of the dinner, I was no longer invisible. No one said anything directly, no apologies were offered, but the way they spoke around me changed. They no longer talked over me or about me like I was not there. It was subtle, but it was real. After dessert, we stepped outside the restaurant, the night air cooler and calmer than the tension we had just left behind. People checked their phones, arranged rides, and avoided eye contact in small, telling ways. Emily barely looked at me, and my mother spoke with an unusual level of caution, choosing her words more carefully than I had ever seen before. Daniel shook my hand again before leaving, telling me it was good to meet me, and that he had not expected to run into someone from my office that night. I nodded and returned the sentiment, keeping it simple. When they drove away, I sat in my car for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. The strange part was that nothing in my life had actually changed. I had the same job, the same responsibilities, the same skills I had always had. The only difference was that someone outside of my family had recognized it, and that recognition had disrupted the story they had been telling for years. As I drove home, there was no sense of victory, no dramatic satisfaction, just a quiet understanding settling in. They had not laughed because I was actually a failure. They had laughed because they believed the version of me they had created. And now, for the first time, that version did not quite hold up. It was not revenge or triumph, just the presence of a truth they could not easily ignore anymore. And I knew that the next time we sat down at a table together, that truth would still be there, lingering in the background, making the old jokes just a little harder to say.